There is a kind of person who, in the middle of a perfectly normal afternoon, stops and wonders why they just said something the way they said it. Not replaying it out of anxiety, not worrying about what the other person thought, just noticing, turning the moment over like a stone to see what's underneath it. Most people brush past these flickers, but some people can't. They feel pulled inward, toward the quiet workings of their own mind, as if something in them insists on being understood. If that sounds familiar, it probably hasn't always felt like a gift. People like this are often described as overthinking, told they're too much in their head. The world tends to reward quick action and decisive motion, and when someone pauses to observe themselves, their reactions, their patterns, their interior weather, it can look from the outside like hesitation, like they're stuck. But that's not quite what's happening. What's actually happening is something more deliberate and much older than people realize. What we're really talking about here is awareness, self-awareness specifically, and not the soft social media version of it, the kind with a journal and a morning routine. The real kind, the kind that changes how you experience your own life from the inside. And here's what rarely gets explained correctly. Awareness isn't a personality type. It isn't something you either have or you don't. It's a set of mental habits, neural pathways technically, grooves that form in the brain through repeated, particular kinds of attention, which means it can be cultivated, and it can also be weakened depending on how you live. Neuroscience has made this increasingly clear over the past 2 decades, and what's emerged from that research is genuinely worth sitting with. There is a region of the brain called the default mode network. It activates when you are not focused on the outside world, when you're daydreaming, reflecting, imagining the future, making sense of your own story. For a long time, scientists thought this network was just background noise, the brain idling. It turns out it's the opposite. The default mode network is involved in some of the most sophisticated things the human mind does: self-reflection, perspective-taking, constructing a coherent narrative of who you are. When this network is well integrated, when it communicates fluidly with the prefrontal cortex and other regulatory structures, people tend to have a richer, more stable sense of themselves. They're not just living, they're aware that they're living. But this doesn't happen automatically. It develops, and the story of how it develops usually starts much earlier than adulthood. Think about the environments that shaped you as a child. Whether there was space for your inner world, your feelings, your confusion, your questions about why people did what they did, or whether the priority was always outward, getting through the day, keeping the peace, performing well. A lot of people grow up in homes where there simply isn't room for reflection, not because anyone was cruel, but because life was loud, or demanding, or emotionally unpredictable. When that's the case, the nervous system learns to scan outward, for cues, for safety, for what's expected. Inward attention starts to feel like a luxury, or worse, like a risk. The habits that build awareness, then, are partly a way of reclaiming something, not as a project of self-improvement, but as a return, a slow, patient relearning of what it feels like to be present to your own experience without immediately judging it, fixing it, or pushing it away. And none of this is better or worse than another way of being. Some people are deeply action-oriented. Some people thrive when they move fast and think later. The nervous system takes many shapes. This is not a hierarchy. It's just one particular way of moving through the world, one that has its own texture, its own costs, and its own strange, quiet gifts. Here is the counterintuitive part. Awareness, when it deepens, does not always make life feel clearer, not at first. In fact, one of the most disorienting things that can happen when you start paying genuine attention to your reactions, your assumptions, the stories you tell yourself, is that you realize how much was running on automatic. Responses that felt like choices turned out to have been reflexes. Emotions you thought you were managing turned out to have been managing you. This is not a comfortable discovery, but it is an honest one. And something shifts on the other side of it, not into certainty, but into something more like steadiness. You stop being surprised by yourself. You start being curious instead. The 5 habits that strengthen this are deceptively ordinary. The first is the practice of noticing without narrating. Most of us, when something happens internally, a flash of irritation, a tug of sadness, a sudden resistance, immediately begin explaining it to ourselves. We build a story around it before we've even fully felt it. Noticing without narrating means letting the sensation exist for a moment before the interpretation begins. Just, there is something here. That pause, brief as it is where awareness lives. The second is disrupting automaticity. Routines are efficient, but they are also the enemy of presence. The brain, when it knows what to expect, stops registering the experience. This is why years can feel like they blurred. When you occasionally do something differently, take a different route, sit in silence instead of reaching for your phone, eat with no other input, you force the brain to actually process the moment rather than skip past it. Small interruptions in the automatic create small windows of consciousness. The third is attending to the body before the mind. Somatic awareness, the practice of noticing physical sensations as emotional information, is one of the most underrated forms of self-knowledge. The body often registers an experience before the thinking mind catches up. A tightness in the chest, a change in the breath, a subtle pulling away or leaning in. Researchers in affective neuroscience describe the body as the first layer of emotional processing. Learning to read it fluently is, in a real sense, learning to read yourself. The fourth is sitting with ambiguity. The mind is a pattern completion machine. When something is unresolved, a conflict, a question, a feeling that doesn't have a name, there's a strong pull to rush toward a conclusion, to decide, to close the loop. Tolerating ambiguity, staying with the open question rather than forcing an answer, is one of the more demanding mental habits, but it's also one of the most clarifying. Many of the most important things about yourself only reveal themselves slowly when you don't pressure them into premature resolution. The fifth is reflective distance. This one has deep roots in both contemplative practice and modern psychology. It means finding a small but real separation between what you're experiencing and the part of you that is observing the experience. Psychologists sometimes call this the observing self. It's not dissociation, actually. It's a more intimate contact with your experience, because you're no longer completely swept up in it. You can see it, and what you can see, you can eventually understand. None of these habits are dramatic. None of them require extraordinary discipline or a restructured life. They require only attention and a willingness to be honest with yourself in the small, quiet moments that make up most of a life. And here is the thing about people who are drawn to this kind of inner work, the people who stopped and wondered about themselves on an ordinary afternoon. They are not, as the world sometimes implies, lost in their heads. They're doing something that the human nervous system is actually built for: making meaning, processing experience, building a coherent, integrated sense of self. Research on what's called psychological integration, the degree to which different parts of a person's experience hang together, consistently links it to well-being, resilience, and the capacity for genuine connection with others. The inward turn, it turns out, is not a retreat from the world. It's often how people find their way back to it. If you've ever felt like your own depth was inconvenient, too slow, too sensitive, too hard to explain, it might be worth considering that what you were experiencing wasn't a malfunction. It was an orientation, one that, given the right habits of attention, has a great deal to offer. You were never broken. You were noticing. And there is something quietly remarkable about a mind that refuses to just pass through its own life without paying attention. There's another layer to this, something about what happens to awareness over time, and why some people develop it deeply while others seem to move further from it as they grow older. If what you heard here felt true to something in you, that part of the story might matter too.